initially it was very painful to understand what really freedom was. But as soon as I understood what it was and I was empowered by it, I would rather die than not being free.
And we hear that or read about it from people from all walks of life, all cultures, countries across history. That is, once they have the taste of freedom, there's no going back. Welcome back to the Kevin Roberts Show. Every guest we have on this show is so special to the future of America, the future of free people. This guest we have in this episode, however, is in a category of her own, as you will soon see. My new friend Yeonmi Park is a successful defector from North Korea. Yeonmi, thank you for joining me and thank you for everything you've done.
Thank you so much for having me.
So we have this custom on this show of starting the show by asking someone their story. Obviously, your story is intriguing and heroic. And for anyone in our audience watching or listening who hasn't heard your story, please let them know how it is that you're here in Miami, Florida for the National Conservatism Conference based on where you were born.
It's a long story.
Sure.
I was born in North Korea, and it's still so surreal to me when I was in there. Every day I had to learn that Americans were bastards. They were trying to kill us. And now I ended up in America. But initially I escaped North Korea when I was 13 years old because I was starving. And millions of people were dying from starvation and seeing seeing dead bodies everywhere. And I escaped North Korea with my mother to China. And in China, we were being sold as sex slaves because Chinese regime did not accept us as refugees. So when I was 15, I eventually crossed the frozen desert to Mongolia. And then that's how I escaped from China and North Korea and went to South Korea.
And obviously, just heroic suffering that went on there. But when you were 15 and finally got to freedom, what was that moment when you realized that you had successfully escaped from North Korea? You had successfully escaped from, obviously, just tragic mistreatment by the Chinese. Tell us, explain that moment when you realized, oh, I will never again not be free.
Yeah. Honestly, in the beginning from North Korea, when you're born in the country, you do not own yourself. To the point of the regime controlling you is they even control your haircut, right? It's funny to the Westerners, but people in North do not even have a freedom to choose what kind of book they can read, what song they listen to, what haircut they get. And going to South Korea, hearing what freedom was, initially it was very painful to understand what really freedom was. But as soon as I understood what it was and I was empowered by it, I would rather die than not being free.
And we hear that or read about it from people from all walks of life, all cultures, countries across history. That is, once they have the taste of freedom, there's no going back. So thank you for your witness to that. How long have you been in the United States?
It's been, I think, 5 years. Around 5 years.
What do you think so far?
Amazing. It's a miracle. I don't think anything else can describe this country. It's just a miracle.
It has to be the case that every morning you wake up and you appreciate what's around us, right?
Definitely.
And the reason I ask that is, I think almost all Americans are actually grateful to some extent or another for what we have. But I can say, having had the great fortune of being born here, that one of the things that's happened in the span of time that I've been alive is that fewer Americans are actually grateful for the freedom we have. What's your response to that? You're not a pessimistic person, but you're someone who not only is an immigrant here, but an immigrant with a heroic set of circumstances. What do you think about Americans' own understanding of our freedom?
I think this is also I became, initially I began my journey as fighting for my people back in North Korea, and now I'm actually fighting for my own freedom in America. And I went to Columbia University in New York for my undergrad, and I just couldn't believe the people in going to Columbia think they're oppressed, right?
Yes.
I mean, in people in North Korea, they don't even know they are oppressed. And really seeing how there are distortion in history and understanding of this country is really scary to the point where I'm very worried about this country.
Well, and that's what we're going to get into here in a moment. I'm curious, when you were at Columbia, if you had the opportunity to talk to some of your classmates who were saying that they were oppressed and explain your own story.
Then they simply tell me, even professors tells me that I'm brainwashed.
Really?
Yeah, they say that I'm brainwashed, and so it's just also Colombia has a lot of training and sense of conduct, right? We have to have a safe space. We cannot trigger others' emotions. You can literally get kicked out of university. So I couldn't like really raise my voice to the extent where I can threaten others emotionally.
So this really ridiculous American concept of a safe space extended so far that someone could have a misunderstanding about the depths of despair in North Korea, which you yourself experienced, and you really couldn't talk about it.
No, I think it's to the point where professor says if you're triggered, even before come to class, do not even give us a reason, don't come to the class. Don't do the reading, don't take anything. And people taking their emotional support animals to classrooms. It was so bizarre. Anything that I've ever seen in my life was like they cannot tolerate even hearing something. They need animals holding on to them during the classroom at an Ivy League institution.
Given what you went through, it had to be completely shocking.
Yeah, it's like.
So tell us about your work. And now that we know a little bit about your background, and thanks for sharing that, tell us about what you're doing and why it is that you're here at the National Conservatism Conference.
So as I said, initially I was bought as a sex slave at 13, and my mother was sold for like $65. I was sold for like just over $200 as a child. And I came to America. I was trying to tell the world that China is responsible for sponsoring this Holocaust in North Korea. There are 300,000 North Korean young girls like me right now are being sold as sex slaves. Their organs are taken out of them. They're being killed. They are raped, right? And I was trying to talk about that, and I get so much censorship. And then I have a YouTube channel too. Whenever I talk about these topics, the YouTube like demonetizes my platforms. I get blocked. And I couldn't believe this, like we have freedom of speech in this country. Why do I get censored for talking the truth? And that's when I realized there's this like very extreme ideology where, anything that you disagree is a hate speech, that we need to ban it. And I feel like even in America, I'm struggling to have a voice right now with using this truth, what China does with North Korean people.
And it has to be so disorienting, if you will, that given what you experienced in North Korea and in China, that when you contrast that lack of freedom with the lack of freedom we have in the United States, which I guess I might say is more intellectual, that we don't even have we sometimes talk about it as freedom of speech, but it's really our government in a different way than your native government controlling what we say with safe spaces and what's going on in universities, right?
Yeah.
So Yeonmi, what do we do about it? I mean, I lead a public policy organization it's loud here at the conference. We'll just keep going on. I lead a public policy organization that's focused on analyzing problems in reality, which is what you've done, but also talking about solutions. And I'm curious, given your experience here in the United States for 5 years, what are the solutions to this problem that you experienced at Columbia and since?
I'm a huge fan of what you do, actually. I read a lot. I educate myself from a lot of reports that you write with your institution.
Sure.
To me, it's almost in America. So when I came to America, a lot of people were asking me. So the number one question they ask is, so are North Koreans dumb or something? Why do they not rise up? Why do they not start revolution? And my answer was, if you don't know you're enslaved, how do you know? How do you fight to be free? That was a problem in North Korea. They don't know even they're oppressed. And in America, I was so shocked to find this. Like, the first thing my mom told me as a young girl was, don't even whisper, because the birds and mice could hear me. Like, say one wrong thing, gonna get not only you killed, but the 3 generations of your family get killed in North Korea. And in America, I was appalled to see that how many people in America censor themselves. They laugh at North Koreans. They are afraid of like mice and birds can listen to them. But in America, people censor themselves every day. I feel like we need to understand why that fear is and how we need to get out of that and I think stand up for what you believe in.
It's a new kind of totalitarianism or a different kind of totalitarianism, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So you've decided that one of the things you can do to convince Americans of the problems we have in this country is to write a book. So tell us about the book.
It's really drawing the parallels. Like especially when I was in North Korea when I was born, my family status was very low. So North Korea, even though found the country, the idea of complete equality, right? Like nobody rich, nobody poor, let's be all equal, socialist paradise. Once we gave all our like property, they abolished private property, the regime divided into North Korea into 51 different classes. We are a homogeneous country. We are not America, we are a homogeneous country. They divided to 51 different classes based on what your ancestors did during the revolution of time. So apparently my great-grandfather had a tiny bit of land in his yard, so therefore he was a landowner. That's why, as a great-granddaughter, my blood was tainted, because I was a daughter of a landowner. Now I came to America, I actually have a son who is half white. Now he's in the big guilty because his skin color, so white guilt. We punish people for not something they did, because maybe possibly their ancestors did. That's a very North Korean regime's tactic. That's how you divide people and that's how you control people. And seeing that, what the heck is like white guilt? What's white privilege? Like my son should never ask there any slavery that happened, how many hundred years ago, right? So I think seeing that, I think a lot of those parallels that is I see happening in North Korea exactly repeating in America, and Americans having no idea what they're doing.
Coming from you, that explanation coming from you, especially about your son, I think is really persuasive for the average American who may not be so political, and they don't necessarily agree with the concept of white guilt, but when they hear about things like critical race theory, they think mistakenly, but with good intentions, that because they're Americans. I mean, we have good intentions about people, that somehow that's a way of telling the truth about race and ethnicity and background. But what you're reminding us is that's a very evil ideology.
Yeah.
And when Americans hear anything like that, especially if someone is willing to put the headline white guilt on it, we need to eradicate that from our schools.
Absolutely. I think that's pure evil. That's so sad. Like whenever we have good intentions, we pave the road to hell, right? It's just a lot of in America people are just so naive, and with the good intentions, they are paving the road to become like North Korea. And I am trying to stop that.
So are you optimistic in spite of these problems facing the United States that as a people, we will be able to overcome them?
So here's a question. I just fled Chicago because of crime. I was robbed in Chicago, and I was robbed during the BLM, the looting. I was robbed by these 3 black women. They were punching me and they take my wallet away around like afternoon in the middle of Michigan Avenue. And people on the street wouldn't help me. They told me that I'm a racist because I'm trying to call police on these criminals. And that's when I realized it's like the madness of the crowd. These people are completely lost. They don't even have a common sense. Because my skin color was not supposed to oppress color, they wouldn't even help me. Now I went to New York. I mean, every corner there's like drugs, there's a crime, so much. So in some ways, I'm in this bubble where there's no rule of law anymore. And I think this is a very important time that we are shaping who we are and how we need to prioritize rule of law above anything, above equity, above whatever that is. We need to have a rule of law, and that is falling apart in Chicago, in New York, especially because I've been living there.
The problem of what's happening in most American large cities is really concerning. I mean, you unfortunately experienced that in a way that's nearly tragic. and I was in the New York area in the last few days as well. And each time I go, it seems as if the situation gets worse.
Yeah.
San Francisco, to use a West Coast example, a formerly great city, is almost like the third world in many blocks of that city. Yeah. And as an American who was born here, I can only imagine what it's like for someone who's proud to be an American now and probably had really high expectations for our country, it has to be very concerning to see the reality, especially of American cities.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. All my life, I fled to be safe, right? Escape North Korea, China. Chasing from the police, running away. I come to America. At least minimum that you expect is safety, and I don't have that. Like every single day, I go out running, walking on the street in Manhattan is a gamble. Like I don't know what corner somebody stab me and like rob me or kill me or rape me. Like literally, it's a gamble. So I think that's where Americans, I think, don't realize how bad we've gotten. And because I saw the worst countries like North Korea, China, I have seen the worst, and like we look a lot like that.
So we need to emphasize as a way of moving forward, rule of law. Heritage, of course, has done that for many years. We'll continue to do that. We look forward to working with you on that. So I'll ask you one final question, and that is, in spite of the problems facing the United States, you're sitting here smiling, which is an amazing witness to your internal optimism. What advice would you give to Americans for keeping their country to be the last best hope for the world, as you saw it when you were migrating here?
I think having some perspective, think about what our country overcame, what America have overcome, right? They built the best nation that ever exists in human history, that they had a bigger challenge than we did. I'm sure like what we are facing seems like really a lot of challenges, and a lot of people saying the world is falling apart, and like, really, you haven't? Have you read any history textbooks? There were much bigger problems back then. I think what we are lacking is like the perspective. You know, it's so funny during the pandemic. Like all my Chicago, everybody think the world is ending, and I'm like, you haven't seen the real problem yet. For me, it was like this is a joke. So I think because maybe we haven't seen such hard times, people really lost the sense of what the hardship should look like. And I think keeping that perspective, if our ancestors overcome all the challenges, obviously we can fix all these problems.
Well, thank you for your optimism. Thank you for being here with me. Thanks for being a friend of the Heritage Foundation, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you so much.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with our friend Yeonmi Park. Obviously, there is a lot for Americans to learn, namely by being focused on the rule of law, by also channeling an optimism at a time when a lot of people tell us not to do that. Once again, Yeonmi, thanks for being here, and we will see you next time.